The role of a special effects supervisor is obviously to design, collaborate with the director, the production designers, the stunt personnel, to achieve what is in the written word of the script.
Hey there, and welcome back to StudioBinder Academy. I'm Brandon. Today we're chatting with Oscar-winning special effects supervisor Chris Corbould, who's worked on some of the biggest films and franchises, including James Bond, Star Wars, the Dark Knight trilogy, and most recently, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Chris, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Pleasure to talk to you.
Now, to start off with, a lot of our followers are in film school and they're up-and-coming filmmakers. Could you explain what a special effects supervisor is and what your duties are?
The role of a special effects supervisor is obviously to design, collaborate with the director, the production designers, the stunt personnel, to achieve what is in the written word of the script. Above that, it's the special effects supervisor's job to come up with ideas, to improve the script, make them different, make them more spectacular, make them more challenging. In GoldenEye, the tank chase was originally a motorbike chase. And I was called in to see Martin Campbell, Barbara Broccoli, and Michael Wilson, and they said to me, "Look, Chris, we're not really happy with the bike chase. How can we make it different?" I said, "Well, get rid of it. There's been lots of bike chases." So they said, "Well, what can you come up with?" And I said, "Well, they're in a military part. Why doesn't he take a tank?" And that's how that whole scene started off, and we had a lot with it. But I think it's the special effects supervisor's job to come up with these ideas. He then has to assemble the crew that he knows can achieve these shots, and really, probably 70% of what we do in special effects is engineering. Whether it be rotating hallways, it can be sinking houses in Casino Royale, tube trains crashing through the ceiling in Skyfall. It's engineering is a major part of what we do. On top of the explosions, the smoke effects, the wind effects, the rain effects. It covers anything that's not normal in normal day life, really.
Now, you mentioned engineering. Was that something you were always interested in growing up, and was special effects something you just kind of fell into?
No, I was at school just doing my examinations to be like chemistry, physics, maths, and I got invited onto the set of a film called Tommy during my summer holidays, which was a film by the rock opera by The Who, and I instantly fell in love with the whole special effects side of it. Then I actively sought a job with a special effects company in Pyramid Studios, and got the job, and was then put with a very, very brilliant research and development engine, and he mentored me for the next 4 or 5 years, teaching me how to technical draw, how to weld, how to use a lathe, how to use a mill, hydraulics, pneumatics, and that became a passion of my life after that.
Excellent. Yeah, I remember hearing in an interview at 17, you had created a gadget out of a ski pole. Is that correct?
Yeah, because you must have a good memory. Yeah, funny enough, there's a Bond exhibition at the top of a mountain in Solden, and I went out there to help them open it. And one of the displays is where you walk along, you press a button and the cabinet lights up. So I pressed the first one, pressed the second, third one, and there was the ski pole that I made when I was 17. So, quite emotional.
It must be such a gratifying feeling to see your work like that, not only on the big screen, but, in museums like that.
Yeah, I mean, when I got a private showing walking around at the museum in Solden, and literally it was a whole exhibition of my life. The rigs, cars that I'd worked on, sequences that were shown on the big screens that I'd worked on. It was a very nostalgic and emotional time for me. I was in pieces by the time I got to the end of it.
Now, if we could, we'd like to jump into some of your previous work. We have some specific films and scenes that we would like to talk about.
All right.
The first film we want to talk about is Inception. Now, there was a seesaw rig that you had. Did you have a specific name for that?
Not really. Funny enough, it's quite a traditional thing in the film industry. Some people call it a teeter board, and literally it's just a parallelogram seesaw, really. So, you can put somebody straight on it when you're lifting them up and down. We use them a lot for flying, when you do playing against green screen. I mean, they're a little bit of the thing of the past. They sort of kind of worked on Inception for what we had to do.
And was that mainly used for tighter shots, or were you able to get wider shots as well?
Now, that was mainly for tighter shots, when he was going down the hallway and, really just tight to mid-waist shots, really.
Now, there's a previous quote from you that we'd like to see if you can elaborate a bit on. You had said, "We program the camera to be at a certain spot in a certain point of the revolution whenever the actors are in a certain position." Was this in reference to a motion control camera?
What we actually did was we built a track underneath the floor of the set. Where the floor was underneath it, we had a very narrow pair of slots where we could fit a camera on top, and there was a trolley underneath, so we could run the full length of the corridor, and we had the ability for Wally Pfister to actually work it on the handles, or we could program it, or although we could program it, it was more we found that because the action was never done twice. Wally really had to, or the cameraman had to go with what was ever happening, because it was pretty wild when they were going around. We built that rotating corridor to do 6 revolutions a minute, which doesn't sound a lot, but when you look at, it's 30-foot diameter. And when we started practicing with Joe Gordon-Levitt and the stunt guys, really the maximum we could get it up to was 3 revolutions a second, because after that, they were losing sight of their performance and really concentrating on just staying upright. So we sort of came to the happy medium. We only ever got to half speed with it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember hearing you say something along the lines of they had to do about 6 months of prep work just to kind of get their legs within that rig. Is that correct?
It was it was probably 5 or 6 months to build the rig. They were rehearsing probably for about 4 weeks on and off. You couldn't do it day in, day out, because you need a little bit of a break from it. And also, Joe Gordon-Levitt had filming commitments on the shooting unit, so he fitted it in wherever he could. But it certainly paid dividends, because he got more and more and more confident, with what it was doing, how it was doing. Because when it's horizontal, everything's floor level. You've got the floor and you've got the corridors coming off to the side. But if you rotate 90 degrees, all of a sudden those corridors coming off to the sides are a 10-foot drop. So you really had to have the wits about them when they were going around in it. And that whole set was padded as well, by the way.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, so they had a little bit of protection.
The whole set was padded. All the walls were all padded, so that, if they did tumble, they weren't going to hurt themselves.
All right, and there was a floor-mounted camera. Was there an operator there operating the camera, and they were just kind of CG painted out afterwards?
No, that's the one I was talking about, that we mounted under a track underneath the floor.
Oh, okay, I got you.
So, that's how the floor was always the floor to the camera, but yet they could go around it because their floor was a different floor to what the camera floor was, if you know what I mean. Okay,
and do you recall what the dimensions of the hotel rooms were?
Oh, I know the corridor was about 140 foot long. The hotel room was, let me think, it was probably about 30 foot square. And that rotated completely as well.
And for that hallway scene, would you be able to speak to the lighting at all?
You're talking to the wrong guy there. I have no idea.
That's okay. We thought we might be, so we just thought we'd ask to see if you might have any information. But that's all right.
No, that was Wally's little bit of art there. All we did was supply the power at the end of that rotating rig. We had what they call electric slip rings. So all the power was going through these rings, which enabled it to turn without all the leads all wrapping up around it.
Okay, gotcha. Now, another scene in the movie Inception, the cafe scene, that was so phenomenal. Could you speak to that scene a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the exploding cafe was a really interesting little sequence because obviously Leonardo was actually in that shot, and we did test after test, directional high pressure air mortars firing out either side of them, so it looked like they were actually in it. But also we were flipping cars over, we were flipping bikes, jerking bikes with cables, and then the CGI guys jumped in and added some extras as well. But it was quite a big shot on the day. We shot that in Paris, so we fitted all the apparatus in there, the air cannons, and we tested in the studios back in the UK to make sure that it was going to be safe. But it was literally high pressure air and lots of lightweight debris. But I think it was shot at over 1,000 frames per second. So really came alive when we initiated it.
Wow, it's so amazing. It's such a great scene. I would have loved to have been on set just to see how it came about in person.
Yeah, well, there was everything. There was newspaper stands all blowing up. There was fruit stands blowing up. It was real carnage on the day when we shot it. But, we did it once and it looked fantastic.
All right, next up, we'd like to talk about No Time to Die, specifically the Aston Martin DB5 car chase scene. Could you explain the process from pre-production through production and kind of what that entailed?
Yeah, the first thing is obviously the script, and the script called for James Bond. If you've seen the film, he's retired now with the love of his life, and they're going off on a trip to Italy. Obviously, an action sequence occurred, and because he was retired, historically, James Bond's personal car is the DB5. So when it came to the action sequence, it was really exciting that he was going to be the DB. So I had to go to Aston Martin and sit down with them as we always do with these sequences. And they said, "Right, Chris, what car are we going to use?" I said, "Well, it's the DB5." So there was a bit of a silence in the room because obviously they don't make DB5s anymore. So they said, "Well, how many do you want of them?" I said 10. So again, there was another deadly silence. So, we looked at the options of, do we buy 10? Well, a couple of million a piece, probably not a good option. Do we rent them? Well, would you rent your DB5 to what James Bond filmed in an action scene? No, I don't think so. So anyhow, we came up with the idea that we would, Aston Martin would supply supply the production to for beauty shots of the car pulling up, Daniel getting in and out of the car, and the car pulling away. And then Aston Martin built 8 replicas, identical replicas. You next to each other, you couldn't tell the difference. But on top of 2 of those, we put a driving pod. So we could have a British rally champion, Mark Higgins, driving the car from a pod on the roof, so that we could have cameras looking in at Daniel and Leia as it was driving out 70 miles out of the streets. And unlike a green screen shot, you got the where their eyes were looking, the G-forces of when they were going around corners, what their body would actually do. So we built 2 of those. We also built 2. Fully kitted out with all the gadgets, obviously the spikes, the little bomblets coming out, the guns coming out the front, smoke screen. We actually had, instead of revolving number plates, we had LED number plates, which were a touch of a button could change LED-wise from Switzerland to France. But they shot it but never used it in the film. And we also had in the rear lights, the traditional Browning guns that were looking guns, single barrel that came out, but they never used them either. So, we stuck with the smoke, the bomblets, and the rotating minigun in the front. But we had a lot of fun with that minigun. One of the things we had to take into consideration, we shot the sequence in Matera, which is a thousands of year old historic town in Italy. And we had to be very mindful that, there were 3 cars racing around it at 70, 80 mile an hour. And the art department of construction, spent a lot of time anywhere where there was a corner where possibly the car could have slid out. They would dress in concrete blocks and make them look like a part of that 1,000-year-old historic town. And in the final sequence where it's in the square and it donuts round, then there's an 800-year-old church there. And everything from 3 foot down, the complete 360 degrees, was dressed in with all our bullet impacts in. And everything above that 3 foot was original 800-year-old building, 800-year-old church. So incredible amount of work and rehearsals and testing went into it. But it was a fun shoot. And the town of Matera is like built on a hill. And then at the bottom, there's a road, and then there's a ravine, deep ravine. And when we did the fast chase along that bottom road, at the end of each take, there'd be a huge round of applause where all the people on their roofs, their balconies, their gardens were looking down on this all happening. And it's like a great big natural amphitheatre. It was a lot of the success of that sequence depended on the collaboration with the townsfolk and the councils, and they really took us to their hearts and had a great time.
That's amazing. How long would you say the pre-production through production process for that sequence took?
We were made from the very first meeting with Aston Martin. I think probably 5 months later, probably 6 months later, we were shooting it. And that's taking into consideration Aston Martin building their 8 replicas, us putting in the gadgets, transporting the whole equipment out there, because you don't just transport the cars. You've got a whole backup team of spare panels, spare wheels, engineering workshops. Logistically, it's quite a big move, but I think probably 6 months from start to finish is about somewhere close.
All right. And was there anything besides, keeping the 100-year architecture intact at the physical location that you had to compromise on, or something that you wanted to do for the sequence that you just couldn't quite do and had to change a bit?
We had, in the early days, we had lots and lots of discussions on what the gadgets would be and what would happen there. And at one stage, we had the car surrounded and then driving through a wall into the ravine and the roof coming apart and Union Jack parachutes opening up. We had another, proposal that it went through a wall after it was surrounded, dropped onto a roof, went a little bit along the roof, dropped through the roof, went 3 rooms, out the end wall, through a glass conservatory, through a cafe, and then onto the road. But after a while, we realised what the end scene was going to be, which was a very emotional moment with Daniel and Leia in the car. They've surrounded, the windows are getting shot in. That was a very, very powerful moment. We didn't want to upstage that moment with some fantastical special effects stroke stunt. So we decided to back off from those and keep it really short, gritty, and realistic.
Excellent. Yeah, I think you all made the correct choice. Like you said, it was such a powerful scene,
Yeah, it was. Really was.
Now, I know this might not be your area of expertise, but do you recall any special equipment, frame rates, cameras, lenses that were used for that sequence?
No, a lot of the fast speeding stuff was done with I'm not allowed to call it that arm anymore. Ultimate arm. We're on an ML, Mercedes ML. With the arm on the top, there's a rapid pursuit camera vehicle. There was some drone footage in amongst there. That's about my limit as far as that's the chips. I don't know about focal lengths or anything.
Okay, thank you. No, thank you for that. That was great. Now, for that scene, was there any visual effects added in post?
Yeah, it was the thing, and I think one of the reasons why we got an Oscar and BAFTA nomination this year for No Time to Die, which is incidentally is the first time in 44 years that it's actually had the nominations for Bond special effects, visual effects. There was lots of invisible visual effects in there. It's like whenever the cars were, screeching around corners, and especially in the Donut Square, they were leaving black tire marks everywhere. So we couldn't wait each time for them to be cleaned, because that was a 2-hour job each time. So they painted a lot of those out. They put a car in, total digital car, the first car that got taken out by the bomblets. they realised that he needed to have that way blocked to make him turn the corner. So they put in a total CG car that got hit by the bonnets. They did lots of stuff like where the motorbike goes up the ramp, does that big jump. They made the ramp look like a piece of architecture, like a buttress. Lots and lots and lots of them. They painted out our driver on the top of the car. Shooting, driving in the driving pod. They painted him out a couple of times. So there's lots of invisible visual effects, which I think will really, really enhance the whole sequence.
All right. Now, for that stunt where the Aston Martin is doing the 360s in that square, how did you pull that off? Well,
it was several ways. The car actually did a 360. Daniel actually did a 360 in it. We had line on the wheels, so now we could lock the front, the wheel and use it as a pivot. But most of that was done for real. And one of the hardest bits was lining up the bullet impacts so that they lined up with the actual gun. So we divided the circle into 8 segments and had control boxes of, I think, 25 hits.
And now for a sequence like that has a lot of effects, does that kind of dictate how you shoot it, from a framing perspective, shot size? Is that something you have to plan on in pre-production? Sometimes we did, for lighting reasons, we did parts of the donut in sections.
So we would shoot the first half in the morning, the second half in the afternoon, so that wherever the hits were going off in pretty good sunlight. That's one time that we did, make changes to allow for lighting. The rest of the time, we just coped whatever the camera angles were. It was what it was. It was a car going around 360 degrees with lots of bullet hits going off. So, you can shoot that for any number of angles. All we had to do was hide the guys that were firing the hits.
All right, next up, we'd like to talk about Skyfall and that train scene. If you could just kind of walk us through, the pre-production through production process, anything you might remember.
That actually started off when I was finished off filming in Los Angeles on Dark Knight Rises with Chris Nolan, and I got a call from Sam Mendes one afternoon, and he said, "Look, Chris, I've got this wonderful underground foot chase through the underground of London, the caverns and metro trains." He said, "But I want one jaw-dropping moment just to bring it all to a stop." So he said, what can you come up with? And I sat bolt upright about 2 a.m, and I thought, well, they're in the underground. Why don't we have a subway train crashing through the scene? And that's how that whole sequence evolved. And I pitched it to Sam. He loved it. He reported to Michael. They loved it. And then we set about designing it. And there was some talk we probably could have done it as a miniature. But at one stage, there was a lot of dialogue after the train crash, so we'd had to dress in a full-size train in the crash position. So I pitched it that we shot the whole thing, full-size and do it for real, which everybody agreed. So then, I got together with my engineering team. Bearing in mind everything I've talked about is teamwork. I was blessed with a wonderful team of engineers and designers. We came up with a methodology of, we would build an overhead monorail, if you like. So the train was actually hanging an overhead track that went from one corner of the 007 stage to the other corner in Pinewood Studios. And we hung 2 carriages. My initial thoughts was just to go and buy 2 out-of-date railway carriages until one of my engineers mentioned that they were 65 tons each. So we decided to make our own. So we made our own 2 carriages, which still came in at 5 ton each. We then had to devise how we drove it into the set. So we had a cable system with a tractor unit outside the stage, going through a series of pulleys which pulled the train in at about 30 miles an hour. Probably the biggest challenge was stopping it, because 10 ton coming in at 30 miles an hour, and we had to stop it pretty quick before it went out the other end of the stage. So we had 3 or 4 different methods of stopping it. One would kick in, then another one would kick in, then another one would kick in. And then finally, we had about 50 tons of sandbags right at the very end. So it just plowed into it and stopped it dead. But the whole set was a collaboration between, the art department, construction, ourselves. Because I didn't want it just to hit the floor and it skid along the floor. I wanted to plow the floor up. So all the floor was built of weak materials up to about a foot in depth. There was lightweight pillars that it went through. Everything that it hit it showed, total destruction. So it was a collaboration between, all those departments for the success of that. And it was a one-off, really. To do it a second time, probably would have been months and months and months of redoing the set. So we had to nail it first time, and we did, and it was a wonderful shot. Oh, actually, you may not know it, but you may not even see it if you blink your eyes. But I was the train driver. I was doing some second unit on that, and Sam sent me to shoot some green screen of the train driver. And he said, it's not quite working. You be the train driver. So I thought it was just a bit of a joke for the outtake reel that they were going to play later. But he actually, for a split second, if you blink your eye, you'll miss it. But for a split second, I am the train driver coming in there.
That's amazing. I'll definitely have to go back and look at that.
Really?
Now, as far as that sequence goes and pre-production goes, were you really involved in the pre-production process, like the previs, the storyboarding, and everything like that?
Not so much, really. That wasn't really storyboarding or previs. It was, it was a train crashing, and Roger Deakin. I walked around with Roger Deakin, the lighting camera on it, and we discussed where to put cameras and. Between us, we placed the cameras to maximum effect. And, most of the cameras always use, the head-on one where it just literally skims across the top of the camera. So it wasn't really previs or storyboarded. There wasn't really any need. We could do that on the day. We didn't need to spend a lot of time storyboarding it. Whereas, the helicopter attack on the end on Skyfall Manor, that was an idea that I pitched to Sam, and he made me storyboard it, pre-visit, and then lucky enough he let me go and direct all the stuff without Daniel. So that was slightly different. But the underground train, subway train, didn't need storyboarding.
Okay, and do you recall how many cameras were used in that sequence?
Something like 10 or 12, I think.
Oh wow!
Yeah. Yeah, well, Roger's such a genius with, the way he films. We were lucky to have him on Skyfall.
Yeah, a lot of our followers, along with us, we're all fans of Mr. Deakins.
Yeah.
And for that sequence, do you know if there was any special frame rates that were used?
No, not really. We might have tweaked it to 36 or something, but I don't think we went anything extreme on it. We wanted it to come in as it looked really without slowing down. But we may have tweaked it a bit. I can't remember actually.
And now I know you mentioned there wasn't any storyboarding or previs, but was there any rehearsal for that sequence?
Well, before we ever got a filming unit on there, we would move the two carriages along slowly, take them into the set very slowly, but as far as a rehearsal at speed, it was do it or, you just had to go for it. But, we were fairly confident, we knew where it was going to go. It's been guided by a track. We knew we could start it, move it and stop it. So, I don't know what else could have gone wrong. It was a beautiful shot and very exhilarating to shoot.
All right. Now, you had mentioned earlier the Skyfall Manor sequence. Could you possibly go back and talk about that a bit more, kind of walk us through the process of how that came to be?
Again, that was a case of being called in to see Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson and Sam Mendes, and they what was scripted was like the end sequence was a sort of cat and mousing through these swamps of the Scottish Highlands. So they weren't quite buying into it. So Sam said to me, look, what can you come up with? And I came up with a helicopter attack on the house. I did a beat sheet explained the beats, which he was happy with. He tweaked a few bits. He then said, right, go and pre-visit. So I sat down with the previous team and pre-visited it. And everybody liked it. And, then he said, go and shoot it. So I had a great time filming, the second unit, strafing of the house, the explosion when the helicopter goes into the house, and the miniature of the explosion going into the house. It was a lot of fun.
Yes, it definitely was an amazing shot. Now, the last film we would like to talk about is The Dark Knight Rises, specifically the flying bat scene. Could you explain any interesting facts or anything that kind of it entailed getting that on screen?
Yeah, I mean, the flying bat was... I must admit, when I first read it in the script, I was very, very disappointed because, up until then, we'd made a real Batmobile that, could do think that it could do. We made a real bat bike that could do everything. Then all of a sudden, we've got this flying bat. So my first discussion was with Chris, and I said to Chris, I don't get this. We've done everything for real up to now, and now you're making this flying bat. Now, I can't do that. I think I'm pretty good, but we're not that good. So he said, well, let's talk about it. And I said, it's going to be all CGI. So he said, well, let's talk about it. So, we sat down and we went through the scenes. First of all, there was the static bat, when they first see it. Well, that had to be a real build. So we built a real bat. We actually built two of them. And then we started talking about scene by scene, where it first comes out of the alleyway. Is that CG or is that real? And I said, well, I think we can do that on a zip line, which is what we did. We had two big cranes each end, zip line, and we pulled the bat out of that alleyway over the police cars, and that worked. There were other scenes, as we started going through it, I thought, yeah, this actually is going to be fun. We built that we mounted the bat on a vehicle that could go 60 mile an hour through the street. It could go up, down, tilt left, tilt right, tilt forward, tilt back. And the CGI guys painted out the vehicle, so we got a lot of value out of that when it was chasing the convoy. We hung it under a heli-lift helicopter in the middle of Los Angeles and took off from a roof and flew it over Los Angeles. We hung it in planes where it drops down into the when the big truck has crashed. We dropped it in on a crane then. So after a while, I was converted because I thought what's happening is that we're creating all these benchmarks that the CG guys have now got to use and make their footage match ours. So I think in some ways that Chris was really clever, and from being very despondent about having a digital flying bat, we probably achieved over 50% of what was shown in the film. So it worked out really well. But the Batmobile, the Batpod, and the flying bat were all designed personally by Chris. With the help of with Nathan Crowley, the production designers. And they were so meticulous. With the Batmobile, I didn't realise there was so many shades of black. Black is black to me, but to them there was 8 shades, and they were discussing which shape to have, which colour to have. So, interesting working with Chris.
No, I would imagine. Now, as far as the rig itself, you said it could go side to side. Was that remote controlled?
It could be either. We could either remote control it, because obviously you had a driver who was driving the truck, and you had 1 or 2 other people underneath who were controlling the left bank, right bank, the tilt forward. So if they went round the corner, the guy could feel that he had to bank to the right, to turn right. And then as it picked up speed, he put the nose down to make it look like it was picking up speed. We had an animatronic Batman in there whose eyes blinked and moved his head. All those little things, all those little tiny bits. You couldn't see him clearly, but you could just make out his head moving, that little bit of movement. But fun time. We shot a lot of it in Pittsburgh. We shot some of it in LA. We had a fun time with that.
And for that flying bat sequence, was there anything that you and or Chris Nolan wanted to do that you just couldn't quite do?
Yeah, I'd like to have made a physical flying bat. But, No, I think we achieved everything we wanted to achieve, and very successfully. I think some of them were great moments. At one stage we mounted it on the top of a skyscraper in the middle of, where were we? New York, I think. Mounted it on the top. We had to take it apart bit by bit because the elevators to get up there was only like about, I think, 8 foot by 8 foot. So we literally had to deassemble the whole back, put it in bits in this little lift, take it up to the top and reassemble it again. But, the view from up the top of the skyscraper was absolutely amazing.
Now, one more sequence from the Dark Knight trilogy, the plane hijacking scene. Could you touch on that a bit?
Plane hijacking, yeah. I mean, again, we did, quite a bit of that for real. There was, guys coming out of the back of the transport plane on wires, stunt guys, and we hung up a real fuselage of the plane under a heavy lift helicopter. Originally, Chris wanted to have the two actors in front of camera when the fuselage dropped away to the ground. But I said, that's just bridge too far. I'm not prepared to do that. So, we comped them into we released the real fuselage away from a heavy lift helicopter, and that sort of fell to the ground. But we built a plane rig that could go from horizontal to vertical. When the plane takes over and the wires take up and it lifts it horizontal, it lifts it to vertical. We built a rig that could do that, a hydraulic rig that so we got the right body movements of the plane going from horizontal to vertical. That was quite a big mechanical rig that we built. Chris thinks big. Everything he does is big. There's no compromise. He wants what he wants. And, when we flipped the truck in Dark Knight, I wasn't sure we could do that. So I tried softening Chris up a little bit by asking him if, maybe we just flipped the trailer unit and left the tractor unit flat. So we used the tractor unit as a hinge, and he didn't want to do that. And then I tried working on him to say, can we make it a shorter truck and not an 18-wheeler? And he didn't really want that. So, in the end, I said, look, Chris, I'll do you do. I'm going to go do a test, test site. And if I can't get it over, then we'll have to think of plan B, whether it be a miniature. Probably would have been a miniature. But we rigged the truck. We went to the test site. The guy hit the button and it flew over. So, the secret was we had two great big teeth in the front. So as soon as the back lift off the ground, these teeth dug into the ground and formed a natural hinge. Because what we were worried about is that as soon as it lifted off, it just moved forward and we lost our momentum. So I had two guys that were geniuses at doing that sort of work, and they came up with the idea of these two big teeth. But we had I thought we cracked it then, and then Chris and Al wanted to do the shot in the main banking district of Los Angeles, LaSalle Street. Actually, was it LaSalle, Chicago? I can't remember. So we went down the street, and then I was walking down. All I could see was manhole covers in the road, and I asked the local council to give me a plan of what was under the road, because a 100-ton pole hitting the ground, which is obviously the cannon that pushes it over, creates a lot of pressure. And all the way along the road, it was underground vaults, utility services. There was only two places on the whole road where we could actually do the shot. So Chris chucked them, and we've had the day we were up. I was down at the start, and we're ready to do it, and we started pressurizing the big nitrogen cylinders in the back. And then when we were ready, I said to Chris, right, we're ready. So he said, are you coming down to the camera? I said, no, I'm staying here. So we called action, and we sent the truck off on its way, and it went. And I thought to myself, there's going to be two outcomes here. There's going to be the loud whoosh of the cannon going off, sort of a little bit of quiet, and then the sound of a lot of breaking glass and deadly silence. Or there's going to be a loud whoosh of the cannon going off, a bit of a silence, a crash, and then loud applause, where one had gone through the front of the bank and the other one had gone down the centre of the road where it should have done. And luckily enough, it was the second one. So it was a total success.
That's so amazing. Yeah, when I first saw the shot, it just blew my mind. I thought this can't be real. It has to be CG. But I mean, that compliments to you and the team.
Yeah, no, it was. That's Chris all over. I remember Chris was annoyed the next morning because somebody had photographed it on their iPhone out of the window. There's 20-story buildings each on it. So he was slightly annoyed about it. And I said, well, look, everybody knows it's real now. Everybody knows it's real. It's no dispute. So I'm over the moon with it. And no, it's not going to stop one person going to see it because of some little iPhone. They want to see that in the big screen on, in IMAX. So yes, bring it on.
Now, from a special effects standpoint, do you see a difference between, large format cameras such as IMAX to, a regular format like a RE or something along those lines?
Not really. No, for what we do, it is what it is. And, obviously it's a much bigger screen, so you've got to work that much harder to keep control lines out and people out. But from the actual action side of it, no, we shoot it. We do exactly the same. Most of the DB5 sequences are shot on IMAX.
As far as your collaboration with the visual effects team, is what you shoot dictated by what they need, or vice versa? Could you speak to that a little bit?
I mean, in Chris Nolan's respect, he will do everything for real. And that's his mantra. I want to shoot it for real unless it physically can't be done. So generally on sort of live action sequences like that, the visual effects guys really have to fit in around what we're doing. Obviously if they need something doing to help out in the overall process, then we collaborate together and to achieve that. It's a great marriage these days between visual effects and special effects. We work together really well. Our main aim is to get the best result that we possibly can using a combination of both methods. So we work very closely with each other.
Now, I know you've done quite a bit of second unit directing. Is that maybe we might see more of later on? Like, has any of the studios reached out to you about being a director, or is that something you would even be interested in?
In the long run, I would definitely be interested. I'm at the moment, I am concentrating on second unit directing, and not necessarily action sequences. One of my favourite films I did second unit director on was Christopher Robin with Mark Forster. Which really just shooting and choreographing camera moves for invisible features that are not there. I had a great time, and I had a real gas doing that. And Nutcracker and the Four Realms was another one I did second unit on, which was great action sequences in it. But that I find them really challenging and really fun. So I'd like to do some more of that. I'm working on a couple of scripts myself, which now I've got a bit more time. Hopefully one day I may get to direct those, but we'll see. At the moment, I'm just having a little bit more time, for myself and my family. It's pretty full on when you're doing these big blockbusters. It's 50 weeks of the year, flat out. You're exhausted at the end of it, and then you're starting on another one. So now it's the second unit directing is a bit more livable. It's a couple of months here, 3 weeks there, a month there.
Having worked with, I dare to say, some of the greatest directors of our time, do you see any similarities between them? Probably differences more than similarities. Chris is Chris. Chris is the writer, he's a director, and he's a producer. So he's a one-stop shop. He wears three hats. So, he writes it, you collaborate with him on the writing, coming up with the ideas. He then puts his producer hat on and says, no, it's too expensive, cut your budget. And then once you've cut your budget, he then puts his director head on and wants more than you ever did. So, but he's a dream to work for. You haven't got to run around, all the departments getting permission to do this, financial permissions.
And Sam is a great director. Sam Mendes, is a theatrical director. What's more important to him is the characterizations and the storyline. And, I learned a lot from Sam in that things that we do shouldn't overshadow the storyline and the characters. That we need to dovetail into it to keep it real and true. So, he's another kind of director. Mark Forster. I learned a lot from him on Christopher Robin. He was so focused on the characters and what they should be doing, where they would be and how they would act. I think the main thing about all these, probably the one thing that they've all got in common is passion. They're passionate about getting it on screen, which is a great thing. Martin Campbell, Casino Royale and Goldeneye. He's a bundle of energy. He's up at 6, drags you onto the set to go through the shots, mega organised. He's a million miles an hour when you're shooting it. It's but exhilarating to work with.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you set the record for the biggest explosion and then one-upped yourself and broke the record for a bigger explosion. Is that correct?
No, it was a different record, weirdly enough. The one on Spectre. For some reason, they called it the biggest stunt explosion on, even though there wasn't a stunt person in the shot. And that was just the biggest explosion. The one that we got on the last film, No Time to Die, was the biggest amount of high explosive used. So although the one in Spectre looked and was a lot bigger, there wasn't as much high explosive in it. Whereas when we did the final scene, when Daniel gets blown up, we did massive explosions which have more high explosive in it than the other one in Spectre. A bit of a weird conundrum, really. I wasn't totally on the whole record thing, but the production wanted it, and I knew that as soon as it got announced, I had every other special effects guy ringing me up saying, "Oh, I did a bigger one than that, a bigger one than that." So I think it was three that said it in the end, but that was the Eon Productions who run the bonds are masters at gaining publicity, and that works for them. So I can't stand in the way and say, "No, I don't want you to do it," because it's selling their film.
All right, Chris, to wrap up, we have one last question for you. What would you say is the most difficult special effect you've done in your career?
I don't know. There's so many of them. I mean, there was, I'll give you a couple. In the world is not enough. The attack on the house in Azerbaijan with the helicopter, the big saws underneath, was challenging on many levels. First of all, we had to, how do we shoot a helicopter? This is in the back lot in Prime Studios, doing all this with the saws underneath it, cutting through the car, the buildings, the walkways. So we got the biggest tower crane in Europe, a huge one. We had to lay concrete foundations along two sides of the paddock tank that were 6 foot 2 meters deep. It was so heavy. We then computerized all the movements of the crane. So it's travel along the track, its rotation, the hook going up and down, and how far out the trolley along the jib. We then obtained a dummy helicopter from Aerospatiale, which we then hung under this helicopter. And then we built the saw blades, which hung under the helicopter, which rotated. And although they looked like sharp, wouldn't have cut butter, for obvious reasons. You didn't want to hurt anybody with those things going around. So that little combination on its own, we could put the helicopter, we could probe a path into the set. Bear in mind, anywhere it cut through, we had to make that soft and breakaway. So we had to hit it exactly on that mark, hence why we computerized all the movements of the crane. So we could bring it in, drop it, and then hit exactly the right mark, exactly right, to make sure we hit our breakaway pattern. So that was one thing. We mixed that in with explosions and bullets. There was plenty of those. And then, the car itself, that was the, what was that, the Z8. We had to build a car that sat there. The blunt saw blades could cut straight away through the middle of it, and it collapsed in on itself. So again, that was making a complete breakaway soft section of a Z8 that looked, to the eye as if it was a real car, but in actual fact, it was, you could have karate chopped it in half if it came to it. So, there was lots and lots and lots of challenges, different challenges for different reasons. So that was quite complicated. I think the other one in the world is not enough was the boat chase up the Thames. There was a lot of logistical problems with that. We were doing these big dynamite explosions, not in the Thames, but a little docks off of the Thames. We had to liaise with the bomb squads, the anti-terrorist squads, show them what we were doing, because we were right in the centre of London. Dynamite charges in one of the docks there. So that took a lot of time to work together with the authorities and get their permissions and their confidence for us to be able to do that. As well as this high-speed chase up the Thames, past the Houses of Parliament. I think we had one complaint one day from the ministers there, but it was a great sequence.
That's amazing. Now, any last words for somebody that's looking to get into special effects, or something that you might have said to your younger self when you were just getting started?
I think you've got to be passionate. You've got to be careful. You've got to have no ego. I've learned over the years, I took on many, many trainees. I tried to take on 3 or 4 trainees on every film that I went onto. And one of the things that I learned is if they were keen, the other guys, the senior guys, would take them under a wing and spend hours and hours and hours teaching them. So, don't come in with too much of an ego, because the people back off from that. And I think really try and get an engineering. You don't have to come in with engineering experience, but that's where you should be heading, because so much of what we do is engineering. It really is the benchmark of what we do in special effects. Aside from all that, and also your job opportunities are much more. If you can weld and use a lathe, use a mill, work with hydraulics, as opposed to just going on a set and doing some smoke and letting some bullet hits off. You're on for a lot longer, because you're building all these big rigs. Passion's the main thing, though. You got to be dead keen.
Excellent. Yes, so you heard it here first. Passion, and I think that goes for all filmmakers. You have to have a passion for what you do.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's what it'd be. You wouldn't put up with 16, 17, 18 hour days, 6 days, 7 days a week if you didn't have the passion to do it. I mean, those days have gone a little bit now. It's got a lot more under control, thankfully. But, it's still pretty demanding at times.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm a filmmaker myself, and, I've been on set for those long days and even short days. And sometimes those short days do feel like long days.
That's right.
Well, Chris, that's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Hearing all the stories and wisdom you shared, I hope to have a storied career just like yours in the future.
Good luck with it. Good luck.
If you're looking for more deep dives into the StudioBinder software or filmmaker interviews, be sure to like and subscribe to be notified when new videos are added. I'm Brandon with StudioBinder Academy. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.